What if the way you were treated growing up wasn't just normal, but actually emotional abuse you were never taught to recognize? Because here's the truth, emotional abuse isn't always loud. It doesn't always look like yelling, insults, or obvious control. No, sometimes it's just silence. The subtle digs, the emotional distance, the constant sense that something's wrong, but you are the one being too sensitive. And if you grew up in an environment like that, especially with complex trauma, it's easy to miss the signs entirely and carry the wounds into your adulthood without even knowing about it. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about what emotional abuse really is and why it matters so much for CPTSD, 7 hidden signs that most people overlook but that shape how we see ourselves in our relationships, and, of course, what you can finally do now as an adult to start breaking the cycle and healing from it. Let's get into this very important topic. Welcome to today's episode. My name is Robert, and this video is based on my own experience, research, and therapy work. I'm not a healthcare professional myself. Instead, I share a client's perspective here on this channel. And for everyone who is looking for more in-depth resources for working through the symptoms of complex trauma, I share the most significant learnings and practical exercises from years of therapy in our premium community, and you can get access at understandable.net/join. Let's start with the big question, what is emotional abuse and why does it matter so much for CPTSD survivors? When most people think about abuse, they imagine something loud. They imagine yelling, name-calling, obvious manipulation. But emotional abuse isn't always that visible. In fact, it can be quiet, it can be subtle and woven into everyday life, especially if you grew up with it. If you want to pinpoint what emotional abuse is, you could describe it like emotional abuse is any repeated behavior that makes you feel unsafe, ashamed, invisible, or unworthy without needing to lay a hand on you. It can sound like sarcasm, it can feel like silence, or it can show up as constant criticism masked as jokes or humor as well. But here is why this topic matters so much, especially for CPTSD survivors. If you were emotionally abused as a child, you probably didn't even know that's what's happening there. Because when emotional abuse is all you've ever known, it doesn't feel like abuse. It feels normal to you, which may sound shocking at first, but that's actually how our brain works. Because if we grew up in such an abusive environment, it appears familiar to us at some point. It just feels like feels normal in a way. Sometimes it even feels good, and we attract relationships in our adult life which are also based on abuse. Emotional abuse matters a lot because it is often the root of toxic shame, of self-doubt and relationship struggles that CPTSD survivors often carry for decades. It shapes your central nervous system. It teaches your brain that love means walking on eggshells. It makes you feel like you have to earn your worth just to be tolerated. But once you start seeing emotional abuse for what it is, not what you were told it was, you can't stop internalizing it. You can start seeing yourself with compassion, not with criticism, and that's why this episode also today matters so much. Because once we name what emotional abuse really is, we can finally start to work through it and heal from it. And this is why we now start with sign number 1 of subtle emotional abuse, which is being shamed for having needs or emotions. If you grew up being told things like, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about, you are too sensitive, why are you always so dramatic, then at some point you probably learned that your feelings were a problem. And so over time you started to hide them. You pushed your emotions down. And this is, by the way, also a thing that we see in avoidantly attached people. Like I explained in this episode about the avoidant attachment style here. You might also have convinced yourself that having needs was selfish or weak, or would just make people pull away. And this kind of shaming doesn't always look aggressive. Sometimes it's subtle. A sigh, an eye roll, a cold shoulder when you're upset. And little by little, it teaches you, if I want to stay safe, I need to stay quiet. But here is the truth. Having emotions and having needs is absolutely human. Being deeply affected by things doesn't make you too much. It means you feel. Maybe you're sensitive, but also that is normal. And if you were ashamed for that, that wasn't your fault. And this is why I also teach how to reconnect and express your emotions and needs, in particular in our courses of our premium platform. So I thought about it, how can put that into a working concept. And those are one of the most important things where I created this concept of the pyramid of. So feeling and expressing your emotions, communicating your needs, setting your boundaries, all those things, they are the fundament for an authentic life, for a connection with your sense of self, and for working healthy relationships. And I created a ton of courses. If you want to attend those, you can join our platform at understandable.net/join and get access today. And now continuing with sign number 2, which is conditional love and approval. Now, the second hidden sign here of emotional abuse is definitely therefore one that can be really hard to recognize, especially if it was just normal in your childhood. Because when love and approval were only given to you when you were being good, then that's definitely painful in the long term. Now, if you were praised when you performed, behaved, stayed quiet, or took care for others, but ignored, criticized, or shut out when you had a bad day or spoke the truth, then what you learned here is that it wasn't love, it was conditional acceptance. You might have felt like you have to earn affection by doing things in a right way. You needed to be helpful, needed to be quiet, successful, bring home good grades from school, or you need to be easygoing in order to stay connected with your parents. And anytime you showed a real emotion or a real need of yourself, you felt rejected by them. This kind of dynamic teaches you that you're only lovable when you're pleasing others, that your worth is based on performance, not on who you are. And that's really exhausting and definitely something that's causing trauma, because it means you're always on high alert as well, trying to stay in people's good graces and terrified that one wrong move will make the love go away and destroy all the harmony you build up with your caregivers. But real love isn't actually earned. It isn't a reward for staying small or staying convenient. No, it's something you deserve just for being yourself. Sign number 3, the disguised put-downs or jokes that hurt. This one can be especially confusing because it's abuse wrapped in a smile. So this one means when someone says something hurtful and then directly covers it up with, "I'm just kidding." So maybe they joked about your appearance, your intelligence, your sensitivity, or something deeply personal. If you experienced that before, you will know exactly what I'm talking about here. And when you reacted, then you were told, "Don't be so sensitive, relax, it was just a joke." But deep down, it didn't feel like a joke. Deep down, it felt like a sting that wasn't allowed to hurt. This is a pretty subtle form of emotional abuse that chips away at your self-esteem because it sends a double message. You're being hurt, but you're not allowed to feel hurt. Over time, these disguised put-downs make you question your own reality, and you start wondering, am I overreacting? Maybe I'm just too sensitive. But the truth is, humor should never humiliate. A real joke feels light, and a real joke includes you. These ones, they isolate, they diminish, and they're also meant to silence. If someone constantly hides cruelty behind laughter, that's not a sense of humor. That's emotional abuse here. And at the same time, I have to say humor is always also like an art form. It's different for everyone and everybody has a different taste. And also there are things such as dark humor and there are jokes we honestly shouldn't laugh about because they're discriminating, evil, or may hurt others. But sometimes we still laugh about those jokes and that's also okay. We should not forbid humor at all. But what I mean here is that we simply should not constantly make our partners, our children feel bad or abused because we use humor as a style to express our passive aggressiveness. This is what I want to pinpoint with the third sign. And that's not just funny, that's abusive. Sign number 4, the silent treatment as punishment. And this fourth one doesn't leave bruises, but it leaves deep emotional scars. And you won't expect that from that fourth sign. It's when someone withdraws completely and when someone uses silence as a way to punish you, not to take their own space and not to calm down, but to control. And maybe you said something they didn't like, maybe you set a boundary, or maybe you don't even know what you did because they won't tell you. They just go cold, they stop responding, and they act like you don't exist. And suddenly, you're left in the emotional limbo, desperate to make things right, even if you don't know what went wrong. This kind of emotional abandonment teaches you that connection is conditional again, and that if you are upset someone, they will just disappear. That love means walking on eggshells again, and silence means danger. This behavior is often what happened to people with a disorganized attachment style, for example, in their toxic homes. And it can also happen that they use it as a form of sabotage in their own relationships in order to get their needs met because they learned that from their parents, from their caregivers as children. I made a full episode about the fearful avoidant attachment style. If you want to explore that a bit more, link that to you up here and in the description below. And if you experience that sign over time, you might find yourself bending, apologizing, shrinking just to avoid the unbearable feeling of being emotionally shut down. But here's the truth. Healthy conflict includes communication, like I explained, for example, in this episode about healthy conflict and intimacy. Silent treatment, on the other hand, is not taking space. It's a tactic to make others feel powerless. And if you have been on the receiving end of it, it's not your fault, it's not love, this is emotional manipulation. Period. Sign number 5, your feelings were dismissed or used against you. And this one can leave a deep imprint because it teaches you that your emotions in particular aren't safe. So maybe when you cried, you were told you're being too dramatic, or when you got angry, you were ashamed. When you shared something vulnerable, it was brushed off, or worse, brought back later to hurt you. And that's emotional abuse at its finest then, because it sends a very clear message. Your feelings are wrong, they're too much, and they're a problem. For me, at least. This is what the caregiver sends to you. And the more that happens, the more you'll learn to hide what you feel, or you even adopt your emotions entirely. You might start thinking, maybe I'm just overreacting again, or maybe it's not actually a big deal, I should keep this to myself again. And if your feelings were used against you, like being mocked in front of others or having your vulnerable moments thrown back at you during conflict, that creates emotional self-censorship. It trains you to shut down your truth because expressing it never feels safe. It creates a mask being created in front of you that you use in safe relationships or in intimate relationships that should be safe. But the truth is that your feelings are not the problem. The way you were treated or your feelings have been treated was the problem. And you deserve to be heard without fear, and all of your emotions deserve that. You can, by the way, also download the full emotion wheel if you want to train to express your emotions and explore them a bit better, at understandable.net/book. Just go there, download the full workbook for free, and get the emotional wheel as well on the last page of the workbook. Sign number 6, feeling like the bad one for setting your boundaries. Have you ever said no or asked for space only to feel guilty, selfish, or like something is wrong with you? That's not by accident then, because that's often a sign of emotional abuse around boundaries. If someone made you feel like you were hurting them just by expressing your needs and boundaries, or acted offended, cold, or angry when you try to protect your energy, you are being taught that your limits and boundaries are wrong and not allowed. In emotional abusive environments, boundaries are seen as threats, not because you're doing something harmful, but because you're no longer being convenient in this environment. So instead of feeling empowered for standing up for yourself, you were made to feel like you're difficult, ungrateful, or you're a problem for the family, for example. And over time, that conditioning runs pretty deep because you might struggle to say no then. You might over-explain yourself, over-apologize, or abandon your own needs just to keep the space, just to keep the peace. In reality, of course, setting boundaries is not a betrayal. It's not unkind and it's not mean. It's what healthy relationships are built on, actually. And if you were punished for doing that, you were not the bad one. Remember that. And sign number 7 for emotional abuse is emotional neglect. And neglect also isn't loud. There is no yelling, no name calling, no obvious cruelty. But what emotional neglect actually is about is named and described here, for example, by Dr. Gabor Mate, because he once said, emotional neglect is not the bad things that happened to us, but the good things that didn't happen that should have. So it's basically when the people who were supposed to care for you weren't really there. Maybe not physically gone, but emotionally absent. Maybe your parents provided food, shelter, structure, all those things, maybe money, maybe a good career and school for you, but they didn't see you. They didn't ask how you feel. They didn't notice when you were hurt, or worse, they expected that you deal with that on your own. So what you learned by that is to not expect any comfort. You learned that needing support only leads to disappointment. And so you became the strong one, the one who copes, the one who never asks for help. But inside, you might have felt invisible, unworthy, or like your pain didn't really matter. And that's what emotional neglect does. It teaches you to abandon yourself because that's what was modeled to you. But your feelings do matter. Your needs do matter. Your boundaries do matter. And it's not too late yet to learn that being emotionally seen and supported is not a luxury, but a basic human need. And maybe as you listen to these signs now, something may have clicked. Maybe you recognize yourself in ways you didn't expect. Maybe you realized, wow, I didn't know that it was emotional abuse. And now you may be wondering, what can I do about it? How do I start healing from something I didn't even have words for until now? First of all, I want you to know this. Just understanding what happened is already a huge step. Naming emotional abuse, especially the subtle kind, takes courage. And once you can name it, you can finally stop blaming yourself for it. So, let's go through a couple steps here. Number 1 is to start with validation. You don't need more self-doubt. You don't need to explain it away, compare your pain to someone else's, or tell yourself it wasn't that bad. If it hurt you, it was valid. If it shaped the way you see yourself, your emotions, or your relationships, it matters. Give yourself permission at first to believe your own experiences. That's the foundation here of healing. Number 2 is to reconnect with your inner world. So emotional abuse disconnects us from the feelings, from our needs, or or even from our sense of identity. So healing means to learn how to come back to yourself gently. Start asking yourself, what do I feel right now? What do I need? What boundaries feel safe for me to set now? It doesn't have to be perfect. But every time you check in with yourself instead of ignoring or overriding your truths, you're breaking the old pattern. And a quick reminder, we also support you for these steps with our courses on our premium platform, where you can get access at understandable.net/join, because this is exactly the topic where our courses are about. Step number 3 is to learn to speak to yourself differently. Now, emotional abuse often leaves behind an inner voice that sounds like people who hurt us. Critical, harsh, shaming, maybe you know that, the voice of your mother, the voice of your father inside of your head. Now, part of healing is learning to interrupt that voice, to say, no, I don't want to talk to myself like this anymore. To replace shame with compassion, to replace self-rejection with care. This is definitely slow work, and there's a lot of cognitive work involved here, that's for sure, but it's the kind that changes everything. You are strong and you can work through emotional abuse from the past, so don't let it define your presence today. And I'm also curious to hear if, after hearing those 7 signs, if it did change how you see your past. Definitely share your experiences in the comments if you want to. I'm really happy to read everything and anything. And if you want to support the podcast, leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Subscribe to the channel, and I see and speak to you in the next episode. Have a great day.